Hi, this is a presentation on hornets in water. What happened was I was doing a separate experiment, and there are presentations online about that experiment where I was tracking leaves in water and watching how they decomposed over time. Some of them were closed bottle, some of them were open. And what happened was that hornets flew into the open bottles, and so they ended up kind of becoming part of the experiment because they flew into the bottles and then. Fortunately or otherwise, they kind of took over the experiment and they proliferated in such a way that they kind of became the experiment. And so, this is actually a presentation born of one experiment, um, and it's just kind of to touch on what happened there, because it happened naturally, and it was interesting. So definitely worth sharing. So with that, we'll just get started. This is a hornet. It's a hornet or wasp, but this is the hornet under a microscope. You can kind of see the head, the wings, its size, just the body. So this one just flew in um, uh, recently, which is why it's not decomposed at all. You can see that it is um, fully formed still. This is sort of what happened. As a full disclosure, I wasn't looking for the hornet, and this part of the experiment actually got a little bit tricky. It was difficult because I had the open bottles labeled. This is my first time doing an experiment like this, but the weathering of the elements did actually wear away those labels. And I had to move the experiment a few times. I had it out in winter, and I believe it did get shoveled, so I so everything sort of got tossed around and mixed up, and so I wasn't able to keep full tabs on what was what with the open leaves, which was it was more difficult as they had lost their color. Um, with the deterioration process, which made it difficult to track. And then it seemed like hornets were in there, and then hornets were not in there. Some of them kind of landed on the surface, and so some of them made themselves scarce. So it was really, really hard to track. Which leaves were which, and as well as which bottles had the hornets and at any given time and which ones did not. So that made it very, very difficult to to track. But this is an approximate. These are the photos that I um, captured while I was observing the bottles in general, and it's probably fairly representative of the process. Even I cannot guarantee that it was not that the experiment was not played with. I sometimes will reference my pesky neighbors, who might get into to my science a little bit, but um, but um, but I cannot guarantee that the what's here is verifiable, just because sometimes variables happen, people get into things get into people. so I don't know. I did not have supervision, or rather cameras um, on these at all times, so I can't say who was in, who was out. It was in the open. It was fairly public, so I can't say exactly what happened, what transpired, if someone was putzing or if they weren't. But I feel like this is relatively representative. So, but I also couldn't tell you 100% if these are the same bottle in and of themselves, just because it was difficult to verify. This is what we've got. Um, and it's not argumentative in any fashion also, so so it's just straight, just very straightforward material. There is a hornet floating in the water for the transition here. We've got it in October and November, and then throughout winter the bottles were actually buried in snow for a while. I wanted to leave the snow around it because I wanted it to be as natural an environment as possible. They were just outdoors and in all of the elements. So it was, the full summer, fall, winter, spring. And so they did experience the sun, the heat, the snow, the rain, things like that. So that you can kind of see in the March photos. This one from 318 is frozen solid, it looks like, but you can see a black speck, which is not great for science to have it kind of fuzzy the way that the photo depicts, but it is there. Um, it was difficult to track it, especially I recognized I chose clear bottles, but because of the shapes, like the indentations of the bottles, um, it they would catch the light and they would make it harder to photograph what was inside of them. So doing it again, I might choose a different bottle type for the experiment, but you can see black on 318. 5-7, it's gooier, fuzzier, with some green growths, but just kind of off to the side primarily. And then it kind of gets more green, um, more green, darker green, and then it's kind of starts to form this sort of like vortex of microbiota, or like a microbiotic goop. I was calling it goop, a few different things, but it was gelatinous, and I don't know what the chemistry of that is, but it did kind of start to form. There are more pictures of it, I believe, on the next slide, because here you can see it where it's like relatively conservative, 520, 6.2, but then it starts to take over the entire bottle, 611 and 618. And then it kind of gets smaller a little bit again, 715, and then it's only on the half the bottle, and 715, 724. But you can see that it is enveloping the hornets in this goop. And I will say also that the hornets did flow. They flew in at their own timing, and I was not anticipating this happening, and so I will remember that for next time. But I will probably track that and bear that in mind for future experimentation, because like I said, this goop kind of obliterated the leaves that we were trying to observe, and so that it just kind of eradicated that part of the experiment with this microbiotic goop that started to form and grow. But it was very interesting. Um, that is kind of the basic outline of how it grew. You can see in these photos that it is dynamic. It's not just on the top of the water. It's not just floating. It actually goes down farther into the water of the vessel. And so that I thought was very, very unique, because it's definitely like a sheet of just goop kind of forming like a mold, that you might see on like a food that's in the fridge for too long. But you've got a little bit of it looks like it's breaking up in the third picture from the end here. The one closest to the words, a unique microbiological ecosystem was formed around the decaying hornets. And that is depicted here is very unique because it was definitely on top of the bottle as well as descending down into the bottle. The goop maintained structure and was difficult to separate from some of the bug elements. It was solidly formed. It didn't look like it, kind of like in some of these pictures, especially that third one from the end. The last one by the words. It looks like you could kind of break it apart, or it looks pretty soft and like you could easily put a finger through it. But it actually did kind of stick pretty well to itself. It had structural integrity, and I did not have good tools. The gloves I had on when I was doing the actual kind of digging around and trying to get the bug pieces out, the bugs were or the gloves were just a tiny bit bigger, and so I've got kind of big clunky hands in the first place. I don't know if anybody else has experienced that, um, but but my fingers were kind of too big for it, and then my gloves were even bigger, and which made it difficult for the detail work. And then I didn't have um, tools like the tweezers and things to kind of pull things apart that are smaller. I was using two scissor knives, um, which I just had to improvise because I actually sold some of my traditional science equipment over the winter, the fall, the winter. Um, so I did not have the stuff that I ended up realizing would be nice to have for this experiment, but I did try to improvise and use what I had available. So the goo was sticky. It made it difficult to get the pieces out, and some of it, the smaller elements, I didn't really bother trying to get it out. You can see I kind of pulled apart the bigger pieces. It made it tough to see which elements were still connected in the goop versus what, because I had to kind of pull it apart and to get the pieces separate, and they were sticking together really, really well. So that it was a complicated process. I was surprised because that goop really changed it up. Um, Goop colors, it was green, it was yellow, it was brown, and it was creamy white. The body of it was orange, but I think elements of the decomposed hornets got into it, obviously, and so those were the elements I believe to have color changed. They were just different materials, and so over time, perhaps they you know turned into goop, or they were started to become digested by this goop, or the chemical reactions of this goop with it. It kind of gave us these colorations. And so, of course, it is potentially a little difficult to see some of the details here because of the reflection of the light on the goop. But there is some green, there is some yellow, some white pieces, and it did appear cloudy. And then just some darker elements over here also. I tried to get some of the pictures of the dynamicy of it, because I don't know what elements of the hornet those discolorations are, and I couldn't tell you, but just I couldn't extricate it either. It is very much a part of the goop, but it was definitely worth documenting. This is probably the more intact piece that I found, that was obvious as to what it was on the Hornet. You can see these are legs, and they are still all together. They lost their firmness, their structural integrity. They're all kind of lifeless, limp, and they're more pliable than they might have been. But you do have, um, them all stuck together still, which I actually thought was a little bit interesting. They didn't break apart, they actually stuck together instead. Um, and I didn't count them, and I cannot verify much aside from the fact that they were in the goop where the hornets were. So I am presuming this is the right insect, and I don't know if a spider maybe crawled in and also contributed to the goop. I couldn't 100% say, like I said, the veracity of this one, the verifiability of this one, um, is difficult. It's difficult to attest to. So, but this one does have all of the legs still attached, kind of formless. I was surprised that they all stuck together on this larger black piece. Generally, when living things, well, just whenever the living, any like leaves or animals, whenever they decompose, they generally turn darker and then kind of turn black, and so that is kind of a decompositional color. When things start to age and they start to disintegrate, they do oftentimes get more blackened, and so this is no exception. This is, I'm thinking, probably the underbelly of the bug, as it does have the legs there. So kind of a unique finding, and I kind of there were multiple hornets. Like there was one bottle that definitely had two, um, and then there was another instance where they also had two. And I apologize because the photos that were there, I feel like they didn't actually capture what I saw. It has two hornets, but they're not what I'm recalling, which is not good. That's not the photos that I remember taking of the two hornets, but they are, that is still representative in this context. So I'm not going to worry about it. I don't know how else to explain, unless those pesky neighbors, but how else to explain that the hornets that I'm recalling were a little bit different. But orange goop developed around the hornets. This is the orange goop. This is kind of the black. You can see the top one right by the words on the left hand side has the black goop and the orange goop around it. I've got more orange goop below it. More orange in the middle, and it was fairly dynamic. I did have to edit these these pictures. Apologies, they weren't videos, but I had to edit these just a little bit because the photos I had taken were, I was using a new microscope, and the microscope was not actually working, in that, like in the photo extrication process, and I couldn't delete them either. It's a new microscope, so then I had to kind of take pictures on my own of the screen, and then so my angles were terrible, and that's human error completely. But learning curve with new equipment. um, so I already missed my first microscope, but that's okay. This one was still cool. It's fun to play with, so we are going to keep it around, of course, but it doesn't have a closer up either, so I wasn't able to really get close. But that is something, that I will bear in mind for my own personal use. But we got orange goop with different reflections, maybe some slight differences in coloration, with density and perhaps other chemical factors that we cannot necessarily see. These are more particulates. I'm presuming the hornets actually decomposed. The ones that were in there longer were probably less chunked up. And so they chunked down, and these are the chunked down that you can see here, just all kind of scattered throughout this goop. And the goop does have different colors. Just around, this is more yellowy, more yellow brown, on the right hand side, and on that first picture by the words, you got some different colors, and that might have to do with just the lighting of the photos also. But it was still the primarily orange goop. This is green goop. There was also green goop. We already had a very small picture of a little tiny bit of green, and this is kind of more of a focus on that green. And the green was kind of around the actually decomposing black hornets. And so you have the hornets here. You can see the goop kind of surrounding it. There's a little bit of orange still around the outside, but right next to the black, it is kind of greener on on these particular samples. And so I don't know if that's like a changing chemistry, or if it's like chemistry in action, or if there are other elements associated. I am not 100% sure. Decay is generally associated with the release of the elements nitrogen and phosphorus, which are meant to promote and sustain soil health. And so that might be some of the chemicals that we see in this decompositional process. If they are decomposing, this would add some nutrients to soil. And I actually did bury these in the backyard. So I wasn't sure because they're small bugs, and it was accidental, but I did end up burying them. So these two will contribute to the earth cycle, and they won't get lost in the trash or in the toilet. They are directly back in the earth. They're gonna serve the lilac bushes well, hopefully. But yeah, so that's kind of the hornet experiment that wasn't meant to be, but happened anyway. Are there any questions?